Welcome to the CFO Show. I'm your host, Melissa Howardson, CFO of Venice Solutions. If you're a CFO listening to this episode, like me, you probably sometimes find it challenging to find the time to both accomplish your operational tasks, but also that time for innovation and strategic thinking. It can be really challenging to break away from the daily grind and work on those impactful tasks that will help move the business forward. Sometimes we sit and we don't know where our week goes. We come in on Monday, we meet with our team, we lay out a roadmap for the week, we jump into our online meetings or in-person meetings, and we go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And before we know it, it's Friday, and where has the week gone? I know I'm not alone in trying to find that balance, and that's why I've asked another CFO to join me today to discuss this topic in more depth. So let's get to that conversation. Joining us today to discuss the balance between innovation and operations is Nicolas Herman of Microsoft Americas Enterprise. Nicolas, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
So, Nicolas, we often hear about this evolution that's happening in finance where we're increasingly needing to help in terms of driving strategy and innovation within our businesses. How do you think about that in terms of where finance should be playing?
Well, I think finance is the steward of the business. And I think the role of the CFO is definitely to be the steward of the business. I think with that comes responsibilities to really kind of understand how the business is performing, making sure we connect the dots. I think the CFO has a unique position in a way that it kind of looks at the business 360, right? And there's very few positions that actually allow us to do that. So I think it offers a unique perspective on what's happening. It also gives a responsibility to steer the business in a certain direction, right? So the strategic element and kind of forward-looking element of the role, I think is super important. So I think in that kind of forward-looking element, there's a notion of, kind of how do we innovate? How do we move forward? What is the direction that we want to take? And I think as part of that, there's an element, of course, of transformation. There's an element of technology that comes in support to that. And I think more and more that falls also as a responsibility to the CFO. I mean, we're not alone on that journey, obviously, right? We're part of boards and leadership teams that kind of share that responsibility. But I think the role that we play in there is essential. And then, of course, what makes it difficult is that we've got to keep the trains running on time, right? So there's the day-to-day, there's the multiple responsibilities that we have just operationally, right? And I think that's important too, right? Because we cannot just be kind of in that kind of future state of looking at long range planning and strategic direction without making sure that the execution is actually happening the way it's supposed to. And I think that's part of the beauty and the challenge of the role of the CFO at the moment.
Absolutely agree. And I love how you talked about that stewardship, because I often talk to my team about we're stewards and enablers. And sometimes there's this friction of where to balance things and place our weight, because we can't forget about that stewardship as a critical responsibility. And I'm sure, given your role and responsibilities within Microsoft, I can only imagine that your days are pulled in 1,000,001 directions. There's so many things that you could be doing and your team could be working on. How do you think about how to prioritize the work within your own finance organization?
I think there's one critical element there. I think it starts with people. You have to have the right organization. You have to have the right people that will help you just take care of all those multiple conflicting priorities, short-term and long-term. And so I think just thinking about what organization do I have? What are the capabilities and skill set that exist in my organization? Making sure that we have clarity about kind of what we need to do at any given point in time. And it's not only kind of in silo, but it's the way people kind of interact and work together, not only in the finance team, but with our business partners. I would say that's probably the number one maybe criteria, success factor, if you will, to be able to navigate the type of environment that we're in. So I would say probably that's that. The second thing is also, I mean, particularly in our tech industry, just finding the time to learn the business. I don't think you can actually guide the business. You cannot even understand what's happening in the moment, let alone build plans for the future if you don't actually understand what's happening in the business. It's complex. It's time consuming. For us, again, in tech, it's moving like super fast. So the moment you think you know something, oftentimes it's already obsolete. So just keeping pace with the business itself, I think it's not a luxury. It's something that I think actually enables CFOs and finance teams to really kind of add value to the broader organization. And then maybe the third thing I would say that I think is important in the role that we play is just creating leverage for the organization. And I would say probably in a number of ways. One, simplify in the way we operate. Again, not just finance, but in the business. Take an end-to-end approach to the system, right? And again, I come back to the point I was making earlier. Very few roles have the ability to look at the business end-to-end. And then just that capacity to kind of solve problems, identify issues, kind of work on them. I think that's very, very important. And of course, the leverage you created as well by the way you choose to invest and where you put your priorities from a financial standpoint. And I think that's a critical responsibility of the CFO as well. So that's a lot of things already. Yeah. But I'll stick with the first one, right? Because I think everything else you can do and you can scale, provided you have the right organization, the right people.
Yeah, I love the 3 points that you make. I think it sounds like a lot, but it is critical to helping make sure you're staying on track. You talked about taking the time to know the business, which can be really hard to do at scale. And a large organization like Microsoft, there's lots to keep up with. What are some of the ways that you help enable your team to do that scalably? Because we can't all be in all of the meetings. Smaller companies, that tends to be you're on a lot of the trails, or you CC everybody in emails. But as we get larger, that's not as easy to do. Any tips you've got there on what's worked?
It's hard. let's be yes. real, right? I think, frankly, I think it's also individual, right? I think you can create the conditions at scale with a lot of training, with a lot of information. I mean, sometimes we feel that there is so much information that you just can't keep up, you just can't absorb. Mm-hmm. But it's, a lot of it boils down to just, am I able to take time and carve out time to just learn, to read, to listen, and then of course, then there's the, taking every opportunity in the day-to-day to kind of be curious, understand, ask questions. I think that helps. But this discipline of trying to carve out time where you just do your homework in a mm-hmm. way. And it's hard. Like the time is maybe one of the most precious resource that we have. And so just being able to do that, being intentional, is important. I don't think there's a silver bullet, neither at the collective level nor at the individual level. But that helps.
Yeah, no, great. And you talk about those 3 different areas of how to make sure that you are able to prioritize. Is there any one of them that you found is more natural or harder to lean into?
Maybe the one that I've learned over the years is just the ability to scale through the team again. And I come mm-hmm. back to the notion of the team. It's very easy to get absorbed into by the tasks and the deliverables and the deadlines and things that have to be done. And it's almost like a natural tendency for me, at least. Mm-hmm. I think what you learn over the years is that there's only so much that this will accomplish, right? So I think this notion of scaling through the teams and making sure that you have the people that will actually proactively take on a number of those things for you, to me, is critical. I think it's a skill as well that you acquire over the years.
Yes.
I think it's something that you practice. It's something that, and I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary here. I think it's not new, but just the ability to delegate, the ability to kind of be clear on expectation and give people the space and the runway to just do things on their own, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that has worked for me and continues to be work in progress, by the way, right?
Yeah, and I find the same thing is that it sounds so simple, but I have to often check myself in the mirror and say, am I actually starting to become the roadblock?
Yeah.
Because what we used to do maybe isn't the way we should do it. And now it is time to let go of things. There's a natural human tendency we have to want to control some things. So totally agree with you. So Nicolas, along the same lines, how do you fight the urge to work on things that may not be the things that are going to move the needle?
Well, it's interesting that you asked the question. Our global CFO, Amy Hood, yesterday was sharing with us in Microsoft Finance our own kind of framework to think about exactly that. It's a simple matrix, 2 by 2, right? And so on one kind of level is, do you control? I mean, what is it that you control? And in any given situation, do you control it or do you not? And then the other axis is, do you own it? Or do you not, right? Yes or no? And I think, if you control it and you own it, then it's your job, right? If you don't control it, if you don't own it, let go of it. Like there's nothing to do. There's even nothing to worry about in a way, because it's not only about doing, it's also sometimes about kind of this mental drain of the situations and the things that we don't control. If it's controllable, but you don't own it, it's somebody else's work. And that is also an important point, because oftentimes, we see things and there's an urge and there's a tendency to want to get involved. I think just being able to understand, where do I need to play and where does somebody else or any other team need to play, I think it's super important. And if you don't control it, but you still own it, I think this notion of building scenarios, right? And trying to say, okay, I don't control what's going to happen, but let me at least plan for kind of different possibilities, right? And be ready for what will come. So I like the framework because I think oftentimes you look at situations and you can apply it and make that decision, right? So I think that's a useful one, I think, for me.
What I love about that is, especially as companies scale, again, that ability to be in all the things and helping out, it gets harder and harder. And so to know, because what that takes is the ability to trust that others have their area and they've got it under control. So it's underpinning of trust. It also helps avoid the chaos that can come in when people don't even realize that now they're jumping in and doing a job that's actually someone else's. And all of a sudden it gets quite blurry in terms of who's doing what. I'm supporting on this, or I'm now running with it, and assumptions can start to creep into it. So
right. And it works on different levels, right? It works, between the finance organization and the rest of the teams in any business, right? So you can apply it at that level. It works at the individual level as well, as a leader, a CFO with the teams, right? Is this really my job or is it my team's job, right? And so how do I scale? If I control it, but do I really own it? Or is this something that my team should take responsibility for? And then I go spend my time on something else, right? So it works at those various levels, I think.
Any thoughts about how you even make sure that the things you've signed up to own are the most critical, prioritized items? Because there's some often these nice to have things that would be really good to get to, but we don't have infinite resources, and so we have to focus.
That's right. There's a couple of guiding principles as I try to look through or filter through all of that. Yeah. One is this fundamentally aligned with the company's strategy? And every time the answer is no, or there's an hesitation in the answer, I think it should bring us to pause and really look at what we're doing. The second angle of that is this part of the core fiduciary responsibility of the finance organization? And if it is, then it has to take precedent. It has to take priority, right? Again, I don't think it's a silver bullet. Sometimes it's hard to answer those questions, especially the first one. But that's a guiding principle that I'm trying to apply.
And I love, because the simpler we can make the filter, the more likely we are to filter, right?
Yeah.
So I love that it's you've made it nice and succinct. One of the things that I often find in finance is we also have overlaid. We have all these things we want to do, but we have this seasonality to our work that at times we are, if it's year end, quarter end, the teams are just drowning in getting it done kind of work, and there's less time to work on the other projects, the other nice to haves. How do you think about overlaying the things we're wanting to get done, but with the seasonality in mind? Any tips you have there?
I think that there's definitely an element of seasonality, right? And I think we should, and every finance professional would know that, would acknowledge that. And I think we just got to embrace it. It's just moments that are going to be dedicated to just execution and what's right in front of us, right? And things that need to be done. And there'll be other moments that hopefully we can extract ourselves from that a little bit more and take a bit more of a strategic stance or a different perspective on the business, maybe a longer term one. I think even we even have rhythms for that, right? I think there's also moments in the year where we say, okay, let's take a look at not only next year's, planning or budgeting, or, there's also a moment where we look at long range planning, multiple years ahead. I think we should also take advantage of those moments to really kind of try to step away or step back, if you will, take a different stance and look at things from the balcony, I like to say, right? Mm-hmm. And observe, right? As an actor, but also as an observer of what's happening, take a different stance, and then just take that time, right? And really not necessarily rush to, again, deliverables and deadlines and stuff, but just be able to look at things in perspective and take that time. I think that time is more precious, I think, than we know. And I think we got to make the most of it. It's hard again, but
I love that. Look at things from the balcony.
Yeah.
Just different perspective.
Yes.
Really good.
Yes.
And so we've talked a bit about with our teams and how to prioritize. Often we can even fall into rabbit holes as we're sitting around the executive leadership table, and when we're having conversations or start going down a little rabbit hole. Do you have any tips or tricks that you have in terms of when you're participating in that environment and you see that happening, how you lean in and help keep things on track there?
The first one is you don't want to just be the finance person in the room. And what I mean by that is, as a CFO, you of course are around that table because you bring finance expertise, because you have a particular role to play. But to avoid the situation you're describing, I think just taking a different stance, maybe a broader perspective on the business, right? And which implies as well understanding that we have something to say in many other aspects of the way we run the business that are not strictly financials, right? I think just getting involved in conversation around people strategy, around sales strategy, around marketing approach. I mean, all of that I think is also a responsibility of the CFO as a person that has a seat around that table. And I think taking that stance and going beyond our own kind of area of expertise and taking a different approach, I think can help unlock a number of situations. The other one is a little bit of the same, but just making sure we don't get constrained by the unit of accountability that we're responsible for, right? And trying to step back and take a perspective that's more of a company-wide approach to things. I think sometimes it helps just unlock situation because we're looking at things from maybe a bit more myopic perspective or narrow perspective of what does that mean about my unit? What does that mean about my division? What does that mean about, my subsidiary, right? And just taking a broader stance. And so I think that helps elevate the conversation, which I think is what's that's the type of conversations you want to have around a leadership team table.
And I totally agree. I often think reminding ourselves, hey, when we're coming in for this conversation, we all need to put on the company hat first and our functional hats second, and catch ourselves when we're starting to make the conversation into the weeds and a detail that maybe the whole team doesn't need to, and it's a side conversation. I'll make notes sometimes of, okay, I need to talk to so-and-so about this or learn more about that, to not, because we also can create the rabbit holes, right?
And there's an element in what you're describing of continuously be curious, right? And be asking questions. So I think this notion, for me at least, of curiosity, not assuming or not taking a kind of a predefined position because I'm the CFO, because I have certain responsibilities. So this idea of keeping an open mind to other points of view, I think is one that, again, may seem obvious. Sometimes it's hard, right? In the heat of those conversations or decisions that need to be made, is sometimes harder to do. But I think it helps.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I think people think, okay, I'm going to bring up something that involves spending money and better not say this in front of the CFO because it'll be a no, right? So I think it is good to end up being curious about the business and understanding what are we trying to accomplish. You talked earlier about people and having the right people in place. Mm-hmm. So when we think about organizing our finance teams for maximum impact on the business, what are your thoughts about how to go about doing that?
Less about the organization itself, but I think the clarity that we bring around roles and responsibilities. And I've come to realize that it's not only roles and responsibilities for individuals, and I mean by that, not necessarily in their silo or in their individual roles. It's also the way each role interact with each other, right? And it's how do we facilitate those interactions? How do we create rhythm that foster that level of collaboration? So people are not just in their swim lane, hey, that's my job and I do my job. I think the potential there is being unlocked by the interactions that exist between the different people in the team. So I think roles and responsibility in that sense, collectively and individually, I think is super important. There's an element of just recognizing that there are urgencies sometimes that will come and disrupt the priorities. And I guess it's okay, right? I mean, it would be unrealistic to expect that people stick constantly to, what is on the roadmap. I mean, there will be things that will disrupt. There will be things that will come out of the blue. There will be requests from leadership or from, anywhere that will push us in certain direction. I think just acknowledging them, understanding that they happen, making sure that it's not the constant way of operating. I think that's important, but let's not be naive either and think that we can just push those away. They will necessarily happen. And then the last thing maybe is, for me as a CFO or leader, is being very mindful of what I ask and what I ask for. So I've caught myself a few times, asking, oh yeah, can I get this view? Can I get this report? Without necessarily understanding the number of cycle that I'm creating, and the amount of work and that the team is going to have to do just for something that in my mind is a relatively simple, thing and request, right? So I think checking myself all the time is like, is this really necessary? And how taxing is my request on the team, right? And so I think it's my responsibility. I don't know that I'm always doing a great job at that. I think my team would probably argue, but at least I'm trying.
Well, and I love that self-awareness, because I think you're right. Everyone in the organization should stop and check the thing I'm about to ask for. Do I really need it? Because time is the most precious resource we have, and people's time is limited in terms of what they can get done, in a week. And so I think it's good. I also think understanding the impact that you asking for that report will have, because I can imagine if it's, Nicholas wants this report, people might drop everything to get it done. And
sometimes I realize it after the fact.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't mean that. I didn't imply that everything had to stop and people. So I think in an environment of trust, right, with the team, when you're able to create, that type of environment with the team, you also want the people in the organization to come back to you and say, hey, do you really need that? Or, hey, I have this. It will answer 80% of what you're asking for or what we think you have in mind. Is it good enough? And oftentimes it will be, right? And so I think it works both ways, right? And I think you also want to create the type of culture in the organization and the type of environment where people will be able to come to you and say, hey, do you realize what you're asking for? And by the way, I can help you. It's not going to be exactly what you need, but I think it will be good enough.
And I often say along with that, like, we own our time. We know best how to prioritize it and where we see those things that are going to come along and sideswipe our day. And it is a responsibility to at least communicate back what the implications might be, especially if it's a bit of a bigger ask that is suddenly going to derail half your day. Yeah. So something else that's not getting done. But sometimes people don't realize, and we're doing things and then other things are late, or we've created other work that's going to take longer because of allowing the sideswiping to happen too much.
And there's another element in what you just described, which is this notion of providing context, especially when things go in a different direction than the one we'd planned, especially if things come in a kind of fire drill mode or urgency. Why? Right? And there are reasons, right? There are situations, there are business situations that require us to take action quickly, change course. I think what helps a ton and make it better for everyone, and I think helps the team be more efficient and find meaning in what they're doing, is really to constantly provide that context. And I think as kind of a leader or CFO, I think it's also our responsibility in those moments to give people that level of visibility.
And it's easy to forget to do that when you're busy and you assume that people have that context. So great advice. When you think about the future of finance and where we're going, where do you see some of the biggest changes in terms of how teams will be spending their time?
There's a couple of aspects here. I think the first one is we will continue to retain the responsibility for our fiduciary responsibilities for sure. We'll continue to have responsibility for a number of transactional activities that need to happen to produce data, to produce financial information. The point is, can we do that in a way that's easier, faster, more streamlined? And so it's all going to be about productivity of that, right? And I think maybe I'm biased here, but I think that's where technology can help, and is already helping in many ways. We will continue probably more and more, and that should, I think, constitute the biggest share of the time we're spending being those stewards of the business and helping understand what's happening, connecting dots between the numbers, the reality of the business, the markets that we operate in. And so being able to kind of create that deep level of understanding of how the business is performing. Here again, I think it's less about creating report and building data sets, and it's about really what do you do with the data? What do you do with the insight even that you're extracting from the data? And how do you convert that insight into recommendations, plans, and then action? I think the more we can, again, streamline and operationalize that aspect of reporting, and even I'd say forward-looking prediction, like forecasting, the more we can then spend the time around the leadership table, driving and stirring the conversations about, okay, with all that information that we have available, what decisions are we making? What action plans are we implementing? And how are we measuring our execution against those plans, right? And I think is more and more where the CFO spends time. And I think that's where the value is really in terms of in terms of supporting the business. Maybe the last point on this, which again, I think will never go away, but can be facilitated in many ways, including technology, is just keeping everybody safe, right? So there's a notion of compliance, a broader compliance that I think is a CFO responsibility. I think it's a critical one. If it's not there, there's no business, just to be clear. The question here as well is how do we become more relevant, maybe more forward-looking there as well, to understand emerging risk into the business, not just the thing that we think we know, but looking for the things that we don't know yet, and how do we do that? Right? It goes hand in hand with some of the fiduciary responsibilities as well, right? Where I think this notion of understanding risk and reporting risk as well to the business is key. And I think that's one where will continue to be prevalent for these CFOs. It's just the way we do it, right? And I think we'll continue to evolve.
Yeah, and a lot of what you described is exciting work, right? It's actually things that should excite us in terms of where and how we're going to be spending our time. But we have to evolve that way. And of course, along with that, artificial intelligence is top of mind for many folks, and including finance teams. So how do you think that plays in, and how do you, when you think about even skill sets and how we help our own teams continue to evolve the skill sets that they're going to need? Thoughts on that?
Artificial intelligence is the enabler of what we just talked about, right? It is one of the tools that give you the level of productivity that you need in a number of those activities that the finance organization is responsible for, to then allow you to, have more time to do those actions or those activities around driving the business and stirring the business in the right direction, right? So, and not just because that's kind of the name of our AI products at Microsoft, but the AI is really a co-pilot. Right. So, and that's frankly the way I think about it, right? It helps me be more productive. Right. So the way this is going to materialize, of course, you have large language models that can help in a number of ways. You have predictive analytics that can help you in a number of ways as well. You have things even that are more simple, like around how do you produce information, financial information? How do you restitute financial information using AI? And artificial intelligence will be able to do a number of things. They'll not replace what we do. They'll just be there, sitting side by side, almost, right, as a co-pilot in a car. And a lot of the heavy lifting, I think, will be done through AI. So I think that brings the fact that for finance organization, the kind of skill set that will be required is, I think it's less about just how to understand AI than it is about how do we best leverage it. Right? What are the use cases? What are the scenario where I can see myself using it and increasing my productivity? Right? And then it's really going into the direction of, driving the business, understanding the business, building plans, building recommendation. And that alone is a bit of a different skill set as well for finance, right? It's not just the technical aspect of being in the data, being in the spreadsheet, being in the numbers, but taking a different approach to what we do. And I think that's also part of the evolution of the finance organization.
And so when you think about that, striking this balance of the operational, but innovating and trying to be on top of where things might be going, has the balance of how we should be spending our time, finding that right balance between those, do you think that it's the same? That's always been something that's been there and it's not changed? Or do you think the balance of that has changed at all in the current climate, how we should be focusing our time?
I think the time spent is evolving towards more of the kind of business insight, business-oriented type of activities. It doesn't mean that the more operational things are not important. I do believe that they remain critically important. I think it's just that we're finding ways to do them in a more efficient manner, right? And that I think is going to continue to be the case, right? Technology playing a part, AI playing a part in how do we kind of make this more efficient, faster, easier, without relinquishing responsibility. Because at the end of the day, I think we continue to have that, kind of fiduciary responsibility I was talking about, and that does not go away. Okay, so I think the importance of both is still there. It's just the balance of time that we'll be spending will continue to, I believe, shift. And that's kind of why I like this notion of co-pilot, because it does imply that we are still in the driver's seat, right? The technology, artificial intelligence is there, helping, supporting, creating the conditions for us to make better decisions, maybe, right? To have a better understanding of what's happening in the business, to have a better anticipation and control of risks, right? All of that. But we're still in the driver's seat. Yep. We make decisions, right? And I think that's one important aspect of the development of technology at the moment.
Now you've helped me understand the name of that product too, so I appreciate that. If we had somebody who was sitting in the CFO seat for the first time, or even any leadership position for that, what would be your advice to them in terms of how they might be able to best make their mark?
Spend a lot of time understanding the business, right? Deeply, and almost try to take an approach that's not kind of finance driven, if I may say, and then ask a lot of questions. Again, not necessarily finance ones, but if I were sitting around a leadership team table for the first time, I think just this notion of curiosity and deep learning, I think for me is something that I would, you also don't have to have all the answers, right? I think we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to have answers. And of course, I mean, we're responsible for bringing information, for bringing data, for having answers to a number of things. But I think sometimes questions, especially at the leadership team table, being able to ask the right questions at the right moment could be as powerful as bringing answers.
I think that's great advice, actually. And when you don't have the answer, saying, I don't know, I'll get back to you later. Yeah. But that skill of how to ask the right questions at the right time, that is absolutely a skill set that I think is hugely valuable. It contributes to your ability to influence, help bring out the best in other people. So love that advice.
Our role is really unique, right? We're in the action with the teams all the time, and we're part of it. But at the same time, we're also kind of using the same reference as I mentioned earlier. We're on the balcony, right? We have that ability to observe what's happening with a little bit of distance, right? And so I think just being able to play that in the leadership team as the dynamic of the team or as the dynamic of the conversations unfold, I think is also kind of a unique skill set for CFOs. And I do believe is a powerful one.
Well, Nicolas, so many great insights and such valuable advice today. Now, whenever we have a guest on the show, we do have 2 rapid fire questions that we like to ask. So are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. First one, what is the best piece of business or leadership advice that you've ever received?
I'd say be curious. And that will connect with a lot of what we just talked about, right? This notion of not assuming, this notion of being able to look at any given situation from different perspectives, this notion of engaging with business partners and looking at things from their viewpoint, this notion of the reality is complex and there's a lot of angles to it. So I think this notion of curiosity, our businesses are complex when you think about it, right? And so this notion of being curious and asking a lot of questions, I think to me, that's the one.
Did you learn that early on in your career, or was it a little bit further in?
Oh, I learned it the hard way. You think you have to have the answers. You think you have to be the one knowing, and you think sometimes you think you are the one that has to be right. And that's not necessarily the case. You just have to stay curious a little longer.
Sometimes a little humbling helps. Is some of your best learning moments, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Second question, what has been the most impactful book that you've ever read?
On the professional side, I would say it's a book called Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman, who's a leadership and culture consultant that has been operating with a lot of kind of large companies around the world, including Google, including LinkedIn, Microsoft. And so this book, Conscious Business, speaks about kind of how do you bring your true self and how do you bring your own values into the business. So it speaks about really core integrity. It speaks about notion of a little bit what we just discussed about, like, it's not about being right? It talks about a notion of success beyond success. What is true success? And so success is not necessarily being right. It's not necessarily the way we measure through metrics and performance. As an individual, it's also winning is being aligned to your own core value and bringing them to work and make the environment around you just a better place for everybody, right? So there's notion of communication in the book. There's the way of, you engage. There's a way of managing conflict. There's a way of, and so that's been really impactful.
I am going to have to read that book.
Yeah.
It sounds great. Thank you so much. Such valuable advice that you've shared with us today, Nicolas, and appreciate you coming on the show.
No, thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Melissa. It was a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. And if you'd like any more information about today's episode, please visit the links in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts because you don't want to miss an episode. For the CFO Show, I'm Melissa Howitson. Until next time.